The topic of this short video is public financial management in decentralized and decentralizing environments. The first question, obvious one, is what is public financial management and how is it used in decentralized and decentralizing environments? Well, we know that public financial management is the science of budgeting, spending, and accounting for public funds. Many would also consider it to be an art because there is more than just technical aspects to it. It's one of the most fundamental elements of public sector reform because it provides information both for higher level oversight processes as well as information to citizens who are going to be judging government performance. What's their relationship? Well, the relationship, I think, to some extent, I've just explained. You need a good PFM system to have good decentralization. But one of the problems is that they're often treated rather separately in practice. They often don't work that well together for a number of reasons. One is that they're often under the control of different ministries at higher levels of government. And these ministries often have different perspectives on decentralization. The central role of a finance ministry, of course, is to protect, manage the country's finances and make sure that they're being used well. And the central role of decentralization is to get these powers down to the local level. And that often comes into conflict. We often find central government ministries that, finance ministries, that are reluctant to give the kinds of powers that local governments need in order to attain the benefits of decentralization. So this often leaves us with a situation in which there are conflicting policies. You have decentralization policies that genuinely do empower local governments and PFM policies that place heavier control than is necessary on lower levels of government and restricts their ability to act in a way that allows them to attain their benefits. In some cases, they are also heavily supported by external agencies that also have their own agenda on what is the appropriate priorities and what is the appropriate balance between central oversight and local autonomy. One of the other problems that we also observe in the relationship is that because they're separate reforms managed by separate ministries, they have a tendency to start at different times. So if you start with a PFM reform, as has happened in some countries, you end up with a system that may appear to be more centralized, give more of a balance to upward accountability than is really necessary, and too little priority to downward accountability. And in contrast, if you start off with decentralization, which again some countries have before they really get into a proper PFM reform, you may set up a system that's too decentralized, that isn't worried enough about national goals and standards and so on and so forth, and is worried more about empowering local governments and their connections to citizens. So the trick is to get these relationships correct, to start off with an appropriate balance of control, central control, upward accountability, and downward accountability. And in different contexts and in different systems, this starting point is probably going to be different. And then the question becomes, over time, how do the two systems evolve together that you've got a proper kind of balance where the standards and goals of a good PFM system are being met, but there is enough local downward accountability and enough subnational government autonomy to have a shot at being able to meet some of the alleged benefits of decentralization. Sometimes the best technical solutions on either front cannot be met, And then it's a question of, again, how to get that balance. You don't want something to be purely a technical gold standard reform that is going to be politically impossible to implement, nor do you want a reform that is so compromised by political maneuvering that you're not going to attain the benefits of PFM and decentralization reform. So my third and final question, which actually has three parts, is what are some of the prominent emerging trends that we're seeing in the intersection between PFM and decentralization reform? And the first is, the first question under this larger question is, how can the full extent of local public expenditures and revenues be properly measured and accounted for? Now, why do I say that? I say it because most systems are mixed. Even in decentralized systems, there are lots of things that higher level governments are also doing at the local level. And often what happens is that the full local public sector is not treated. We may understand what's happening with local governments. We may understand what's happening with intermediate tier states or provinces and what they're doing at the local level. And we may understand what the central government is doing at local levels. But how do these three pieces fit together? And this is important for the PFM issue because there can be, depending on the nature of the system, very different PFM systems at the three levels. And so in order to get a good picture of how public resources are being raised and spent at these three levels, we have to bridge this divide. A second major issue under this category is how can local government fiscal responsibility be encouraged? Now, this is a topic that's been around for a long time, and of course, PFM is an important part of local government fiscal responsibility. These concerns particularly emerged after some of the subnational debt crises in Latin America, in particular in the 1990s. And since that time, there's been a lot of effort to try to develop robust fiscal responsibility frameworks. So it's important just in general for PFM and for decentralized behavior, but particularly in larger metropolitan areas, places that may have fiscal capacity, may eventually be able to borrow for infrastructure investment. You need to make sure that there's good fiscal responsibility that will allow for creditworthiness. And the third question, the sub-question, is how can local government budget transparency and accountability be assessed and promoted? The fullest benefits of decentralization and PFM are when there's good transparency, when citizens have access to information on how subnational governments generate and spend their resources, both the resources that they raise directly from the citizens and what comes from above. So these issues of transparency, of right to information, of means for citizens to be able to comment on what comes out of decentralized PFM systems is also becoming increasingly a big issue in many developing countries.